Hey everyone, this is Daniel Corey with Daniel Corey Photo. I have been shooting Fujifilm for a number of years now. I've had many cameras from Fujifilm. I've had the X100, the X100S, X100T, which I have here. I have the X30 travel camera, little zoom camera, which is fantastic if anyone ever gets to try it out. The X-T1, X-T3, and X-T4. I've shot all of those cameras, and I wanted to make a video about the difference or the differences that I've experienced with the X-T3 and the X-T4, and maybe why one would choose the X-T4 or the X-T3. Maybe some of these little details will matter to you. Maybe they won't. There are a lot of videos out there that talk about the major differences between the 3 and the 4, but I figured I'd go through a couple of the little nuanced details that I find to be more beneficial on the X-T4, and a few that I think are actually a little bit better on the X-T3. So we'll get right into it. The similarities are that they have the same sensor, the same processor. You'll get basically the same image quality out of both of the cameras. You can set custom white balances for each of your custom profiles on the X-T4. So if you are, for instance, doing a lot of JPEG recipes, film recipes that you can get online, you can save them with more nuance in the X-T4 than you can with the X-T3. You can really have a lot of different feel to each of your custom recipes on the X-T4 versus the X-T3, which you have your white balance set across all of the recipes, and you can't save the a white balance setting, a Kelvin temperature, or a white balance shift for each of the different custom recipes that you have on the X-T3. So if you do that a lot, the X-T4 will be better for you. I think they also have that on the X Pro 3, the X-T5, the XH2 and 2S, the XS20, maybe the XS10, I don't remember. And then the X100V and the X100VI. You can have the nuanced changes to white balance settings on each of the recipes that you set. So if you like that, the X-T4 will give you more flexibility than the X-T3. Not a massive difference, but it's something to consider. In-body image stabilization on the X-T4 is fantastic. I can shoot the my prime lenses in much lower light and keep the ISO noise down versus the X-T3. Generally, I would have my stabilization in my lenses if I have like the 10-24 or the 55-200. They have stabilization in the lens, which is great, and you don't need it in body. But if you shoot a lot of primes, having stabilization allows you to just keep your ISO down, in kind of like 160 range most of the time, and only move it up if you have to, or if you need more dynamic range. DR 200, DR 400, you'll need to go up a little bit higher in ISO off of 160, but you can keep it in 160 for the most part and have much cleaner images. So I really like stabilization in the X-T4. I don't shoot a lot of videos, so movie stabilization isn't something that I'm doing very much, but I do plan on shooting a little bit more video with the X-T4. So having stabilization, of course, is beneficial for that. I also adapt quite a few lenses on the X-T4. I have some Nikon lenses from f-mount, and I also have Olympus lenses from the older OM1 cameras, the film cameras, and the Nikon FE2, FE. So when I adapt them to the X-T4, I have stabilization. You can also set in the menu names of each of those adapted lenses. I can save my Nikon 50mm 1.8 Series E. I can set my Olympus 28mm f3.5, and I can name them. So that gets baked into your EXIF data and is really quick to change between various adapted lenses, and it will also change the the stabilization, how the stabilization works according to the focal length that you put in. So if you use a lot of adapted lenses, the X-T4 is better than the X-T3 from those standpoints. Something that I guess bugged me a little bit on the X-T3 and the X-T1, and sometimes the X100 series cameras, is that when you bring the camera up to your eye, because they have an LCD that is always showing, you don't always know what your last view mode setting was, and the EVF and the LCD may operate a little bit differently than the last time you picked up the camera. For instance, if you have EVF only set and you pull the camera away from your eye, the LCD is not going to turn on, so you have to press view mode in order to get the LCD to turn on. For instance here, now it's in the EVF or LCD, or it'll switch depending on which setting you're in. You never quite know what it's going to do. And you have to cycle through, I think it's like 5 different view mode settings on the cameras. You can't turn off view modes that you don't ever need. You have to cycle through each of them every time if you find that you're in the wrong one. However, with the X-T4, because the screen, the LCD on the back is closed, the way that you can set this up is that with it closed, I can still have the EVF turn on and off when I bring the camera to my eye, or when it's just down by my side, the EVF is off even though the camera is on. When I want to immediately get into LCD, I can do that very quickly by just rotating it around, of course. And then your auto sensor on the EVF versus the LCD still functions. So I know exactly how the camera is going to work when I pick it up. When it's closed, I'm EVF only. Perfect, that's great. If I want to use the LCD, I open it up, and I've still got the auto sensor between the EVF and the LCD. I also love that I can shoot this camera in any orientation. So if I'm shooting something on my left and I'm in a tight space, I can open it up this way and still see where I'm shooting on the LCD with the camera pointed this way. And then I can do the exact same thing with the camera pointed in the opposite direction this way. And you still have the flexibility of being in portrait mode for shooting this way, just as you would on the X-T3. I love this screen, no doubt. It's a fantastic screen, but the X-T4 has so much more flexibility in the angles that you can shoot, and the ability to know exactly how the EVF or the LCD screen is going to function when you pull the camera up to your eye is almost invaluable to me. ISO. All right, so the ISO dials on these cameras are a little bit different. On the X-T4, you have the A, but you also have C, and you have your manual ISO right there. On the X-T3, you have A, but you have a low and a high. Sorry, a low and a high, but no C. So what that means is when I'm shooting the X-T4, I can very, very quickly go from an auto ISO or a manually set ISO into C, and then use my thumb wheel to change ISO. And I will typically leave this on 80, so my noise levels are going to be super low. And then I can quickly adjust up from 80 if I want to, back into A, where it's going to use one of my 3 custom ISO settings, or into 160, which is kind of where I leave this camera for the most part, if I'm in decent light, and not really go up above 160, so that the ISO noise, the noise levels stay low on the images. So I really like the way that the ISO dial is set up on the X-T4. And in the X-T3, if you want to use a command dial to adjust ISO, you have to change in the menu how the A setting functions. So you can set it to be A, where it's going to choose one of your 3 auto ISO settings, or A becomes command dial. But on the X-T4, you don't have to change that setting internally. It's just got both of the options on the ISO dial. So awesome. They've improved the wheels, the command dials between the two cameras. So I find that the X-T3 has a very kind of recessed rear command dial where you can't turn it that much. Each time you rotate it, it's only going, a few degrees and maybe only switching whatever setting just a little bit. And on the X-T4, it sticks out way more, and you're able to really roll that command dial to get through the settings. It has bigger grooves compared to the X-T3, so your finger grips it a little bit better, and it's different, or it's harder to push this button in accidentally versus on the X-T3, where I'm almost always kind of pressing in and accidentally pushing the button in instead of just rotating the wheel. So the command dials are better now on the X-T4, and I really like that. So when I went from 2 X-T3s to now the X-T4 and the X-T3, they are almost exactly the same button layout, except for the Q menu button is different. You'll notice Q menu is here on the X-T3, and Q menu by default on the X-T4 is up here. But there is an AEL button right here on the X-T4 in the same position that the Q menu was on the X-T3, and you can customize this button layout so that you switch the AEL to being the Q menu. So that's what I did. On my X-T4, now I can get to my Q menu in the same place as I can on my X-T3, and I love that. Small change, however, I kind of wish they had kept it the same as they did on the X-T3, is that your drive mode dial or collar does not have multi-shot, or if you want to do multiple exposures, like a 2 exposure shot in the same image, you can't do that as easily on the X-T4 versus on the X-T3. You've got that setting as a selectable option right there on the collar. So if you do any blended multi-shot images, it's a little bit easier on the X-T3, but nothing that you can't change by just putting that option into your My menu and getting to it really quickly on the X-T4. So minor, but I thought I should mention it. The battery life on the two cameras is completely different. The X-T4 battery life is very, very good. I went on a trip recently where I didn't bring an extra battery, and it wasn't a problem. I could top off the battery or top up the battery on the X-T4 just using USB-C and a power brick, or putting it, plugging it into the wall or a car. Never had to think about having a second battery. I never ran out of battery at a time that I couldn't or wouldn't want to run out of battery. So I don't carry around an extra battery now with the X-T4. With the X-T3, I'm pretty much always going to carry around one additional battery. Battery life just isn't as good, and I don't know when it's going to go out. You can still top up the battery and charge via USB-C on the X-T3, just as you can on the X-T4, but everyone wants better battery life, so X-T4, much better battery life. The doors on the side to get to USB-C or any of your other ports, I think is better on the X-T3. This door, being able to open all the way and come off, is great. The X-T4 has 2 different flaps for your different ports. They're just kind of flimsy, which I don't love, but I've never had an issue with it, so maybe it's not a problem. One more benefit to the X-T4, or one more thing that I prefer on the X-T4, is the shutter sound. I will shoot in quieter locations. At times I've done photo shoots in churches. I have done some photo shoots of performances, ballet type performances, much quieter settings. And also in street photography, I typically like to have a quieter shutter if I'm shooting on the train here in New York, or just walking around the streets. So I wanted to demonstrate the difference in the shutter sound of both cameras. The X-T3 is already great. It's a major improvement, I would say, over the X-T1. This is all preference, but I like the shutter sound of the X-T3 over the X-T1 that I used to have. And the X-T4 is even better. So here's the difference in sound. Yeah, it's better. And if I go into like a continuous setting, I don't have it set to the highest continuous mode on the X-T4. It'll go faster than this, but you'll hear a difference between the X-T3 and the X-T4. Again, I don't have this set very high on a continuous high setting. I just don't need to go into 15 frames a second. It's just not the way I typically shoot. So I like the shutter sound here. Going back to IBIS, one additional thing that I've noticed, and I would love to hear feedback from anybody else that maybe has shot both of these cameras. When I'm using a stabilized lens that has OIS in the lens, I feel that the X-T3 is really, really good because there is no stabilization in the body, and there's no syncing between the in-body stabilization and the lens stabilization. The camera relies on the lens stabilization, which is typically optimized for that lens, and it works really, really well. I am confident that I'm going to get a nice stabilized image even at a low shutter speed when I'm shooting on the X-T3. When I use the X-T4 with a stabilized lens, the stabilizations are trying to sync together. The lens is trying to stabilize, the IBIS is trying to stabilize, and I sometimes feel that I'm not getting as many sharp photos on the X-T4 with stabilized lenses as I am on the X-T3. I'm not sure if that's 100% accurate, but I just feel more confident that I'm gonna get a sharp image on this X-T3 when I use a stabilized lens. So in general, if I'm using one of these, 55 to 200 or the 10 to 24, I'll stick it on the X-T3 and it's great. The bodies are almost the same. The X-T4 is a little bit thicker than the X-T3, not by much. But the grip is definitely better or bigger on the X-T4, and I'm able to really hold this camera with my front fingers and then use my thumb to change settings. Easier than I am on the X-T3. It's good, but I feel like it's gonna fall out of my hand a little bit more. So I prefer the grip of the X-T4 now that I've had it. When I first got it, I felt like the X-T4 was a much larger camera in my hand than the X-T3, but it's not really the case. They're not much different at all. It still fits in the camera bag the way I have the camera bag set up for the X-T3. The X-T4 goes in there, no problem. I don't have to move anything around, any of the, the little Velcro dividers or anything. And I use this Wotancraft bag. I think it's the Pilot 7 liter, or is it 6 liter, 7 liter, 6 liter? This thing is amazing. I really, really like this bag. I'll do another review on this at some point. And I also use this old Wandrd with the zippers on both sides. And I'll do a review on this bag at another time as well. I think both of those are fantastic camera bags if you want a backpack or you want to have a sling. That is all that I can really think of at the moment. Again, I don't shoot much video, so the difference in having the collar of the stills versus movie here versus the metering mode on the X-T3. I guess I prefer the X-T3 having metering modes on that dial, but I don't use that all that often. I just basically adjust exposure compensation according to the scene, even if it's like a pinpoint shot through something. I don't need to switch over to single point metering on the X-T4 all that often, so that hasn't been much of a difference. And I think when I start doing video, the movie collar will be much better. And again, I have a kid, so I'd like to shoot some more video on the X-T4 with my kid doing all kinds of performances or just playing and wanting to record those memories. So I think that will come in handy soon. If there's anything else I can think of, I'll make another video, but I just felt like those were things that I hadn't heard. Some of those things were features or nuanced differences between the 4 and the 3 that I hadn't heard talked about too much in other videos. Some of those little details. So wanted to make a video on that. If you have any questions, let me know. I will be making more content about Fujifilm cameras, Micro Four Thirds cameras. I have the Olympus EM5 Mark II. Again, an older camera, but an amazing camera. I will do a video at some point on my X100T and how maybe I've got a few of the customizations done on this. I love this camera so much as well. So stay tuned for some gear reviews, bags, cameras of different types, and then some behind the scenes for different types of photography that I'm doing out on the street, or if I have any shoots, paid gigs, I will do a little bit of behind the scenes content. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know, subscribe if you'd like, and thank you very much.